one thing to worry about, and that's the amount of traffic you're sending and how much you're paying per meg. For peering, there's a number of things you have to consider. There's the transport to get to the peering point. You have to buy a circuit or a pseudo wire to get from where you are to where you want to interconnect with a peer or connect to an internet exchange. If you're going to put equipment at the far end so you can connect to multiple peers, then there's co-location costs there. If you're going to put equipment there, again, that equipment has a fixed cost. It needs to be paid for, whether you have one peer or 100 peers. And if you're connecting to an internet exchange, the internet exchange might be free, or you might have to pay a port fee on the internet exchange, which will probably be depend on the size of the port you have with the internet exchange. So transit is usually metered in this 95th percentile way. You just pay for what you use, whereas peering costs, as you can see, because they're mostly fixed or fixed for a certain amount of capacity or a certain number of peers, they're far more lumpy. So it's not necessarily an easy comparison to make. This is a graph from a guy called Bill Norton, and those who came to the African Peering Forum last year would have seen Bill. He's got a very good website called drpeering.com, which I encourage you all to look at. It's got a great amount of information on there. This is one of his graphs. And so taking those figures, taking those costs from the previous slide, your transit price is pretty flat. You pay the same amount, no matter whether you do 1 meg or 10 meg or 50 meg or whatever. The cost of peering, however, is a curve, because you've got fixed costs. So if you're paying a lot out, but you're only doing 1 meg of traffic, that's very expensive per meg. If you've got fixed costs, but you're doing 100 meg of traffic, you're way down here. And when the cost of peering drops below the cost of transit, that's when you would think it would make sense to peer. And you could show a graph like that to your CFO, and you go, yeah, okay, if I'm on the right-hand side of this point here, we should be peering. If I'm on the left-hand side, I'm not really sure. But then there's also some other things to consider, as well as the pure monetary thing, which could potentially move this point slightly to the left. So as well as the financial cost and benefits, there's non-monetary benefits involved as well. So for peering, it's a more direct path. This means that you potentially have a direct connection from you to the peer network. This makes for more predictability in where your traffic from that network is going to come from. If you know you're going to get all your Google traffic on a piece of fiber that's connected to one particular router port, and that's always going to be there, rather than coming over what could be one of 3 transit providers, it might shift around from day to day, depending on which transit provider is having a problem and which bit of the internet beyond your control is overloaded. Then there's some benefit to knowing that all that traffic is going to be on one port. You don't have to oversize your ports too much. You know where it's all coming from. There's no third parties involved. So if you're peering with someone and you have a problem with reaching a server or system on that other network, then you don't have to go to your transit provider. It has to go to someone else, and it has to go to someone else, who then has to go to the other network. And then there could be anywhere along that route that there's an issue. You know that if you are peering with them, then it's between you and them, with potentially an internet exchange in the middle. That's going to be worth something as well. There's increased resilience and reliability, again, because of this direct connection. And usually there's better performance for customers because it's this direct connection. But then there are some non-monetary costs when you have peering rather than having transit. And one of the major ones is, in fact, you don't have SLA. There's no service level agreement. With peering, it's pretty much always on best efforts basis. So if there's a problem with the peering, then there's nothing you can do about it. You have to try and work it out yourself with the peer. You can't claim compensation like you could perhaps from a transit provider if a transit provider had a problem. There's no knock to call when peering breaks. If you're the network engineer, you have to figure it out yourself. You can call the guy at the other ISP and the other operator and try and figure it out, but it's not like you can call the transit provider and scream at them and say, make my internet work. And it's probably more complicated. And you can by having peering to multiple networks, there's multiple routes that traffic come in and out of your network. There's multiple places that things can break. If you just have a single transit provider or even 2 transit providers, there's only 2 places that things can go wrong as far as your direct internet experience is concerned. There's obviously lots of places on the internet things can break, but that's their problem and they can deal with it. So peering requires management, it requires configuration, and it requires some technical knowledge, which is why a number of you are here this week to learn the technical knowledge to be able to set up and manage BGP. So as well as the numbers and showing your CFO this graph or a similar graph or a table of costs for peering against transit, you have to weigh these non-monetary benefits and costs as well, which can potentially influence the decision one way or another. It's not always just about the money. So then once you've got to this point, you have to look at who you're going to peer with. And you do this by ideally looking at who your biggest people you exchange traffic with. So Mark did a presentation earlier looking at some of the tools that you can use with NetFlow. You can look at if you have a cache or proxy on your network, you can look at how much traffic you're getting from particular sites on that cache. And if you don't have the NetFlow tools or the network analysis tools to be able to do this yourself, you could just ask the other if you suspect there's a network that you do a lot of traffic with, you could just ask the other network, well, how much traffic are we doing to you? Is it worth peering? And certainly, if you email Google and say, hey, we're this network, here's our IS number, how much traffic are we doing to you? Can we peer with you here? Is it worthwhile? One of us will try and get back to you as soon as possible, and we have the traffic analysis tools to be able to provide information on how much traffic we're sending to you guys. And once for your target potential peer, you have to consider the peering policy of both you and the other party. Now, hopefully everyone here has an open peering policy. We certainly do. It means that you can connect to as many networks as possible, into as many places as possible, hand off as much of your traffic via peering as possible. Selective means that you've got some restrictions. It can vary between pretty basic ones like you have to have a 24/7 NOC through to you have to be connected in multiple places in multiple continents sometimes. And then the worst kind of peering policy is restrictive, or what I've called here tier 1, where basically they won't peer with anyone unless they're a similar size and they cover a similar geographic scope of the whole world. So this is the level 3s and cogents of the world, who, unless you're a big, massive international network, they won't peer with you, at least not for free. They'll happily sell you peering, but that's something else. And then finally, generally, you don't peer with your own customers, because obviously they're buying transit from you or internet connectivity from you, and if you peer with them, then you're taking money away from your own pocket. And there's a saying, once a customer, never a peer, which some people still stand by, which means that if this person's been a customer of you in the past, it means they might come back to you as a customer in the future. So you probably wouldn't add them as a peer, because if you had them as a peer, they probably wouldn't ever come back to you as a customer again. So what do you find in peering policies? Well, there's the operational stuff about things that peers expect other peers to have. And you should craft your own peering policy around what you expect from your peers in terms of these kind of areas. So one could be you expect them to have a NOC that's available 24/7 to answer any networking issues if it's causing problems. If the peering is causing problems, you want to be able to sometimes get through to someone even if it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Now, this doesn't mean having people on call on standby in an office, standing by a phone 24 hours a day. It could just be a guy with a mobile phone. But the ability to phone someone any time there's an issue, which doesn't necessarily mean Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., is a big thing. You may have some requirements around traffic volume. You may not want to peer with very small networks, or only peer with them through root servers. Will earlier showed that the Google policy about if there's very small volumes of traffic with ISPs in Europe, then we'll only peer with them via root servers. The situation is different in Africa because everyone's got very small volumes of traffic and there's not so many root servers, so we're more liberal there. But yeah, some people still stand by peering ratios, but personally, I certainly don't, in that there's content networks and eyeball networks, and so the flow of traffic isn't always symmetrical. Sometimes you have one network sending more traffic to another. It's more about is it mutually beneficial for you guys to peer. And then there's policies about where you want to peer as well. Technical stuff about making sure routes are sufficiently aggregated, making sure ideally you're using MD5 encryption on your peering session. whether you accept meds and what you do with them, and making sure that you don't use the peering connection for DDoS attacks and that kind of stuff. And then there's various things about, in the peering policy you may have, about the fact you may terminate the peering if there's an issue, whether you have an issue about people disclosing they have peering, maybe you don't want people to publicize it too much. So in terms of, there's another graph from Bill Norton, and in terms of where internet traffic comes from and the types of peering policies that these guys have, unfortunately most of the internet traffic comes from people with the most restrictive peering policies. So up here you'll find that the tier 1 networks, the Cogents and the level 3s and the global crossings of the world. Down here you'll find the people that are more open about peering with anyone. I do say mostly because there are one or two people up here that have open peering policies. Google's one of them, Akamai is one of them. So it's not necessarily that if there's a lot of traffic that they won't ever peer with you, but more often than not, unfortunately the big guys will only peer with other big guys. So where are you going to peer? Once you've found who you're going to peer with, you have to find a mutually acceptable point. You can use peering DB for that. Mark showed you that earlier. And if there's more than one potential place you can go to, you have to consider the costs of getting to that point, because it's a long way away. If it's expensive to buy capacity there, if it's expensive to host equipment there, then that's a consideration as well. Just because the guy's there in this location that's a long way away doesn't necessarily mean that it's worthwhile for you to go to this place to pick up the traffic. You also have to consider the reliability and the scalability of peering at that particular location. So by reliability, is the facility reliable? Is the fiber to that or wireless access to that location reliable? And can it scale to the traffic growth that I'm expecting? So if I'm expecting traffic to grow to, I don't know, a gig or 10 gig, is there capacity there available, both on my side and on the peer's side, to be able to exchange that volume of traffic? And also the final thing is, if you're looking to reduce latency, so reduce the round-trip time between you and the other network, if you're in Nairobi and the other guy is in Kampala, you probably don't want to be peering in London, because that means the traffic's going to take a massive hairpin to go from one location to the other, and you're better off peering somewhere closer to home. So you've done who and where, and the next question is how to peer. And you can do public peering or private peering. And I'm sure you know the difference. The public peering is best for aggregating demand from multiple smaller networks. You pay for one port on an internet exchange, and you can reach all those operators. If you have private peering, you can only connect to one particular network, so more traffic, it may be more worthwhile to do so, rather than maybe if you have a lot of traffic to one particular network, rather than paying for a port on an exchange just for that, just to reach a bunch of traffic from that operator. So how do you peer with guys when they don't want to peer with you? Andrew has talked about some of his techniques in terms of getting content on your network. Sending the peer lots of traffic is a top tip. For a big network, like if you want to try and peer with level 3, then you could buy paid peering. That's probably the only way most people are ever going to be able to peer with level 3. Making friends is a surprisingly good way, and by that I mean buy them a beer, come to a peering event, chat with them. They'd be amazed by how a hard stance over email becomes softened when you meet someone face to face. You have a drink in the bar, you talk about what's going on in your various markets, how business is going. This is why peering events are so popular, and it helps business get done. A pretty extreme one, but one that people have done, is you can buy another operator who already has peering with the person you want to peer with. So when operators are being consolidated in a market that's consolidating, reducing from a large number of fragmented operators to a few number of consolidated ones, peering has value in terms of the business. So if an operator has peering with a particular network that now, for whatever reason, isn't peering with other people or won't peer with your particular network, buying that business could mean that you could continue that peering. Not guaranteed, but it has happened. And you can also leverage a broader business arrangement. So if you're doing a bigger deal with a company about something else, you can say, well, why don't we peer as well? We exchanged a lot of traffic. Let's enhance our relationship and enhance our partnership by peering as well as doing